What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video I'm very happy to be finally talking about Inside Out 2. This time around directed by Kelsey Mann, this film stars people like Amy Poehler, Phyllis Smith, Lewis Black, Tony Hale, Maya Hawke, and so many more. So when I heard we were getting a new Inside Out film nearly a decade after the release of the first one, I was both worried because it's been so long, but also incredibly excited. I covered the first Inside Out a few years back when I was just going back and covering a bunch of animated films coming from Disney and Pixar that I had yet to cover, and Inside Out was without a doubt one of my favorites to go back and revisit. I've always loved that film, and honestly is one of my favorite Pixar films of all time, maybe one of my favorite animated films of all time. It made me cry the first time I saw it. It's made me cry every time since, and if I think too hard on certain sequences, I cry a lot as well. But it's also a film that's incredibly clever and is something that adults can honestly take a lot more from than kids. I think it's something that definitely can appeal to kids. I think that kids can enjoy it and probably take a lot away from the film as well. But the story was so mature and so clever, and it utilized this fun cartoon world to showcase the emotions that we all share and how we go about things, and it brought those things to life in such a fun way, bring to life all the various parts of our mind and our psyche and the way we think about things and the way that things affect us and the way that that will change and corrupt our outlook on things and how that will change the world within our mind. And when I watch that film, when I think about that film, I'm always incredibly impressed. And so this was just the perfect movie for me right now. If you give me a moment, I want to just talk about myself for just 1 second. But just a few days ago, I actually was invited out to a press screening for this movie, and it's usually at one theater in my local area that's about an hour away from where I live. This time around, it was one of the few times that it was at a different theater, so I drove to the wrong theater, did not make it to the early press screening that I was invited to, and then tried to make it to the other one, to the actual place it was supposed to be at, only to learn I wasn't going to make it in time, so I didn't even bother. I ended up kicking myself the entire rest of the day. I was just completely down. I was so upset with myself. I was just in the worst mood for the rest of the day. I even made a post here on my YouTube page as well as on my Facebook and Twitter, just completely venting, but, calling myself an idiot, speaking down on myself. And I ended up deleting those posts. But, I've been suffering a lot from anxiety, and a lot of times that leads to me not believing in myself. I tend to kick myself when I'm down often, and when it comes to this YouTube channel, I love doing it, but it's so easy to feel discouraged. And behind the scenes, I tend to be somebody who doesn't believe in themselves, somebody who just, again, kicks themselves when they're down. And so after that day, I was completely distraught, even though it wasn't that big a deal. It was a simple mistake, but I took it so harshly towards myself. And a lot of that has to do with anxiety. And this movie touches so heavily on it that this could not have been the more perfect movie for the moment in my life. About 5 or 6 years ago now, I had my first ever anxiety attacks, 2 in the same week. I was never really an anxious person in my early 20s. I wasn't really much of an anxious person throughout my teens. Of course, I had that classic teen kind of anxiety that you may have in social situations, but I was always kind of a free spirit. I always kind of have a positive outlook on things when I was younger. And as I went through my 20s, leading up to this week where I'm turning 31, it kind of changed. My joy started to seep away, and anxiety is something that kind of cripples me these days. There's so many times where I'm behind the camera here, or I'm in between the cuts where I'm making mistakes and I'm beating myself up, or I'm upset with myself because maybe I'm not saying things the way that I want to, or I'm not presenting myself the way I want to, or I'm not able to make a screening or something like that. Things that are simple mistakes, but I ultimately let them weigh me down a lot. And so in the last few years, I've had to really learn to manage this anxiety. I've had to really learn what it is to be a human in a lot of ways. And till this day, till this week, I still suffer from that. And I'm grateful for the people in my life who care to reach out, that care to talk to me, whether it be my fiance or some of my YouTube peers like Mike of Did You See That or D Movie Man, who reach out to me, as well as my buddy, the Big Rob Theory. I have so many great friends at work and people in my life, family, and the love of my life that ultimately are there for me, but sometimes it's so easy to get lost in your thoughts and in your mind. And so going into this movie, knowing that anxiety was going to be such a big part of it, I was definitely curious to see how I was going to feel about it. And I have to be honest, by saying all that, by saying that this film just hit me in my core. This movie was made for me right now in this moment. And I felt similarly when I saw the first Inside Out. I thought that film was fantastic. But again, really tugged on the heartstrings in so many ways. And when that movie came out nearly a decade ago, I was much younger. I was just a few years outside of high school. I was in a different place. And I was also going through a transitionary period, kind of like our main character Riley in that movie. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about that because for me, this movie came out at the perfect time in my life dealing with anxiety. So with all that said, let's get into what the base premise of this one is all about. Riley, the young girl that we followed in the first film, whose emotions we spend time with in that movie, is now moving into her teenage years. Puberty has hit, which has brought on a new set of emotions. You have anxiety in the mix, you have envy, you have ennui, and you have embarrassment. These new emotions start to appear, and they try to work alongside the emotions that we were familiar with in the first film: joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, only to learn that they are not cooperating with one another the way that they think they should. So the new emotions decide to bottle up and suppress the emotions that we followed in the last film and send them away and take full control of Riley. Of course, she's going through puberty, so of course this is very funny in a lot of ways, very much touching on the changes that we go through as we go in through those adolescent years where we're starting to kind of go from being young kids to becoming far more self-aware. Our body's going through changes, our outlook is going through changes, we want to fit in, all those different things. There's a lot of times in this movie that it's very relatable and in a lot of ways very funny in the way that they're able to take that concept and cleverly kind of materialize it in Riley's head. I love the way that they materialize all of these different emotions in these individual characters' heads. Similar to the last film, there's a couple of moments where we get to jump into other characters' heads and see their iterations of these emotions, which I think is just such a fun and clever way of just showcasing all of that. But throughout the course of this film, similar to the first film, with a lot of those praises I already gave it, this film is able to showcase those changes that Riley is going through, those changes that we all go through in such a fun and clever way in her mind, expanding upon the world inside of her brain that we saw as it completely is falling apart in certain areas, where it's expanding in other areas, or parts of her that were so pure are now becoming far more dark. And I think it's just such a realistic depiction of how things are done. And it's funny to say realistic for a movie that's an animated movie for families and kids. It's something that's colorful and whimsical and has a nice little story and a nice little message, but ultimately it felt so relatable. And as somebody who's dealing with anxiety right now, having anxiety as one of the main characters who bottles up our main characters from the last film, in a lot of ways is the antagonist, I think was just so real to me in this moment. And I think something that's so well done in this film when it comes down to our antagonist in the film, these new emotions, I think the best villains, and I think we all know this and we always say it, but the best villains are the ones who don't know that they're villains, the ones that don't see themselves as villains, that truly believe that they're doing something that is for the best. And when it comes down to anxiety, ennui, embarrassment, and envy, they truly are trying to do the best things that they can for Riley. They have a different approach to what it is to make Riley comfortable and happy and successful in life. And Joy, Sadness, and the other characters we follow from the other films are struggling. And this film is not only about, battling things like anxiety and envy and these things that we all kind of deal with, but also kind of realizing that as we get to a certain point in life and these new emotions start to kind of come into play, that as we get into these certain points in life and our outlooks start to change, our beliefs start to be developed, our overall outlooks on life and ourselves start to kind of get expanded upon, a lot of times where a lot of that comes from is not only the great memories, not only the core memories, not only the great things in life, but also the things that aren't maybe our favorite memories, or maybe the moments we didn't love about our life, maybe the things that we said to somebody that we're not fully proud of, or the things that we had said to us that we're not incredibly happy to think back on. I think this film does a great job of really showcasing all of that in such a fun, clever, and silly way, but also in an incredibly relatable way. One of the main things that I said about the first film, and I think so many people say about that first film, is how emotional it is. There are moments that are incredibly, incredibly sad. And not only in very sad moments like the bing bong element of that film, which always fucks me up, but also in just the small little moments between characters in that movie. And I think that this film does such a great job of also touching on that. And I found the third act, the last 10 or 15 minutes, to be just so emotional. I went to see this movie by myself. There was nobody else with me. I obviously was in a packed theater, but I sat by myself. I had seats around me that were empty, and it was just me there. And I was holding back tears. I let a couple of them shed, I won't even lie. But yeah, this movie really tugged on my heart. It really tugged on where I am in my life today when it comes down to its story. I thought it was clever. I thought it was fun. I thought it was silly. I thought it was able to have fun with the premise of going through puberty, but also touching on the reality of the human nature that we all are, the human nature that we all have is what I should say. And it goes back to what I was saying before about beating myself up. That other day when I was beating myself up about missing the screening for this movie, my fiance said to me, she goes, "You gotta allow yourself to be human, and you are always able to have grace for others, and a lot of times aren't able to have grace for yourself." And I think that this film tackles that subject so well. So it really just was the perfect film for where I am at this current moment in my life in a lot of ways. Outside of that, when it comes down to critiquing this as a film, obviously I've already talked on the premise and I've talked on where it's clever and what I think about the story, but it's also beautifully animated. Michael Giacchino did not come back to do the musical score this time around, but instead you have Andrea Datzman, who takes the musical score that he set up in the first film, the musical compositions, and expands upon that here. I think that a lot of the music in the film also helps to really elevate a lot of these moments. On top of that, you also have great vocal performances given throughout the course of the film. Amy Poehler, of course, is great once again as Joy. You also have Phyllis Smith coming back as Sadness, who I thought was really great in this film as well. Lewis Black was making me laugh so much as Anger throughout the course of the film. This time around, Tony Hale steps into the shoes of Fear, last played by Bill Hader. I don't really know why some of the actors didn't return. You also have Liza Lapira playing Disgust this time around instead of Mindy Kaling, which I really enjoyed. And then when it comes to the new emotions that we follow in this film, Maya Hawke as Anxiety is a huge standout. I thought she did such a great job of playing this character who means well, but ultimately is a character that is, just so frantic and crazy and filled with anxiety and is anxious, and showcased that so well. And of course, a lot of that is done by the animation and the character design, but also a whole lot of it comes from that vocal performance. There was a slight shakiness to the voice that I thought she captured so well to make the character both endearing, likable, but also somebody that you can be a little bit fearful of and you don't necessarily fully trust. Outside of her, you also have Ayo Adebiri playing Envy. I thought she did a great job as well. A lot of laughs there. I'm sorry if I butchered this name here, but the actor who played Ennui was Adele Exarchopoulos, I believe it's how you pronounce her name. I also thought that was a funny character, enjoyed the vocal performance there as well. And then you have the character of Embarrassment, who's both very cute and funny throughout the course of the film, played by Paul Walter Hauser. And overall, I think the voice cast is great. I think the musical score was solid throughout the course of the film. The animation is great. There's those heart-tugging moments that you want from a Pixar film, and ultimately a great story that really is human at its core. And I think the best Pixar movies, when you go back to the early days of what made people fall in love with Pixar, it's not the fun, crazy, whimsical adventures on their own. It's the human stories at the center. It's something that you can take away from the film and think about later on, whether it be about friendship, family, ourselves, it doesn't matter. I think Pixar has always been able to tell fantastically human stories, and I think it's something that people want from new Pixar. I think there's been a couple of installments here and there that have been fun or enjoyable, but maybe didn't tug on the heart the same way that some of those earlier installments did. And when it comes down to this film, Inside Out 2, I think they absolutely nailed it. So massive kudos to everybody who was involved in this film. This has easily become one of my favorite films of 2024, and I do recognize that because of where I personally am in my life, which is why I shared a lot of that this film may sit a little bit higher for me than some people. But based on some of the other reviews I've seen, it seems like most people are enjoying this film at least found it to be a good time. I personally loved it. I thought it was maybe not as good as the first one, but it's right there for me. Honestly, I think the two of them have proven themselves to be probably some of the best Pixar films ever made. So I look forward to hearing all of your guys' thoughts, and I look forward to maybe hearing some human stories down below. How did you guys feel about this film? How did it maybe connect with you emotionally? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.